Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. I hope you're ready to crack into Asian horror films from 2006 because that's what we're going to do here tonight. I enjoyed a majority of the movies that were released during this particular year, but since we're covering over 40 titles, our first two videos will mostly be dedicated to some of the weaker ones. But first, we have some honorable mentions, of course. And remember, these are movies that some people classify as horror films, but I do not. The best of which could be The Host, which is an excellent South Korean genre bender. But some other good ones are Dog Bite Dog, a violent Hong Kong film, and A Bloody Aria, which is an interesting dramatic thriller from South Korea. Some of the ones I did not care for were The Wall Man from Japan, Vampire Cop Ricky from South Korea, and The Third Eye from Hong Kong. So, some honorable mentions there for you. So let's get started on Asian horror films from 2006. And as always, titles for all the movies I discuss are listed in the description box below. And we begin with the worst movie, of course, from 2006, which is not quite as easy as some might think for this particular year. If you remember some of the historic stink piles that I voted as bottom of the barrel for some of the recent years that we've covered, it's been fairly easy, really. There's been some standout awfulness in each particular year. 2001 had Blind Beast vs. Killer Dwarf. 2002 had Are You Ready? 2003 was a little bit more difficult just because of the plethora of awful movies that were released during that year. Most notably, Die Covery and Demon Hunting. But things got easier again in 2004 with Marinée and 2005 with Id. Now, I would say that there are probably 5 or so real contenders from 2006 for this worst of the year, I guess you could say, award. So unfortunately, I cannot really award a championship belt to a clear-cut winner, but perhaps you could decide for yourself if you're willing to sit through all of them. I would not recommend it. So let's get started with one of them here. And that one is Eko Eko Azarak 5, R Page, from Japan. A journalist named Takashi arrives at a rural town to investigate a string of mysterious accidental deaths. Around the same time, a young woman arrives dressed in a sailor suit school uniform. Her name is Misa Croy, a powerful witch who has been sent by the leader of her black magic cult to seek out and destroy a powerful demon of destruction called Ezekiel. Eventually, Takashi and Misa cross paths and decide to work together to solve a supernatural mystery. This sounds rather good, right? Well, it isn't. In fact, it's not even close to being good. I kid you not, they spent almost the entire runtime of this film walking around woodlands, looking bored. And they're not even good-looking woodlands. They're like the type of woodlands you would see in your suburban neighborhood, somewhere in, in the U.S. somewhere. It's just not even nice to look at. That's the entire film, basically. I have complained in the past about the original trilogy's lack of witchcraft overall, but compared to this installment, those are action-packed extravaganzas. Our page is incredibly low budget and uncinematic, as I like to say, feeling more like a made-for-television flick that is lacking in anything entertaining at all. Production values are very bad in this one. So, again, like I said with the Eko Eko Azarak 4, I would just say stick to the first 3 films of this franchise and skip the rest. Apparently there's a part 6 out there that's called B Page, but considering how part 4 was garbage and how part 5 was a zero-budget waste of time, I don't think I'll be watching any more of these anytime soon. So stick with the original trilogy. Now our next film is another installment in one of the worst Asian horror franchises of all time, if not the worst, and that is Shake, Rattle, and Roll 8, a Filipino horror comedy anthology. If I swore in my videos, which I don't, I would scream a big F you to this franchise right about now. Shake, Rattle, and Roll is a blemish on humanity and represents all of the bad things about lazy commercial filmmaking. It patronizes and insults its viewers by tossing in a bunch of low-grade crap that, for the most part, doesn't even come close to becoming entertaining. I'd rather watch a Michael Bay Transformers movie than any of these films. Well, the exception of the first two are okay, but all the rest of them were just worthless, and that's really saying something. So this particular installment, Part 8, is the same old, same old. It's 3 short films that don't offer much in terms of either scares or effective humor. The first entry is called 13th Floor. It's about a group of birthday planners who decide to have their party on the 13th floor of a building, while also dismissing the superstition of Friday the 13th, which of course does not turn out well. It's a horror comedy with worthless humor and annoying characters that will make you want to rip your hair out. No surprise given this franchise. Complete garbage, I would rank this first film here. The second story, called Yaya, is about a nanny who is also an aswang monster. Not as bad as the first story, which isn't saying much, but still incompetent overall. In the third story, LRT, which stands for Light Rail Transit, a group of commuters are stranded in an abandoned station and are stalked by a monster. Most surprisingly, this one is somewhat watchable, actually, but still comes off as mediocre because there are no good death scenes, and this one kind of relies on that a little bit. So overall, Shake, Rattle, Roll, and 8 exhibits much of the same low-quality direction and terrible acting that we've come to expect from this franchise. So although the individual stories get a little bit better as they go along, I would still say you got to skip this one. Now our next film here is much reviled on the internet, and for good reason. Now our next two are very notorious. The first one here is called Dark Forest from South Korea. The few people who have seen this one have ranked it amongst the worst of contemporary Korean cinema, horror or otherwise, and you know what? I basically agree with this assertion. Some friends are on a trip to the mountains, as the plot goes. They walk into a dark forest, of course, which is restricted to the public. But they soon find themselves in trouble with deadly forces, and find that they can't get any reception on their cell phones. Wow, that's surprising. As one might expect, bad stuff starts happening to them. This is one of those Asian horror movies that actually avoids most of the cliches from its country of origin, only to then incorporate most of the cliches connected with American slashers. So for example, stereotypical wafer-thin characters, self-inflicted sprained ankles. Oh, there's a few of those in this one. You just gotta roll your eyes, etc. You know what I'm talking about here. The story itself sloppily mashes slasher, ghost, and zombie genres together, which sounds interesting on the surface, but it just does not work. With a truly incompetent script that really is the driving force of its failure. I don't remember much about this movie, but I do remember it being very messy. The editing is quite bad at times, too. But on the positive side, there are a few bloody deaths to enjoy, but that's not nearly enough to recover from this debacle, which is certainly one that you will want to avoid at all costs. Now, this is part of the 4 Horror Tales film series, and it's definitely the worst of the bunch in my opinion. Now, we will review the other 3 titles in this film set in the next few videos, because all of them were released during 2006, and these are all South Korean films. So it'll get better when we get to the later titles. And our next film is probably the most notorious of the films we are covering tonight, but I do not think that it is a clear-cut winner for Worst of the Year. Now that might be, kind of a negative thing regarding the other films, that they're that bad to compete with this one, or it might kind of mean that it's bad, but not quite as historically awful as I was expecting. And that is Dead Waves from Japan. Now, when a television producer visits the home of a brother and sister to interview them for his series on paranormal phenomena, what first appears to be a simple case of psychopathology turns into a full-blown epidemic of demonic manifestation. To his horror, he realizes that he is not only a witness to the blossoming insanity, filming each screen with horrific expression, but that he and his technology have been intricately tied to the cause and conduit of its spread. I don't know who wrote that synopsis, but That's a nicely written, spiffy plot synopsis from IMDb of all places that makes this sound like a possible newer classic, a real psychological gem. And don't let the eerie opening sequence with moody lighting fool you. This film is not good. It is not good. So we can start with our protagonist here, who is a void of nothingness, I guess you could call him. This actor stares blankly ahead for almost the entire time. Dude has no charisma, and I don't know if I've seen him in much else, but yeah, he's not good. And, his complete lack of depth as a character is also a problem here, both in terms of the actual character development, which supplements his bad acting, making this movie very hard to sit through, because this guy carries it. It's not like one of those films where you have an ensemble cast. There's a few side characters, sure, but this guy carries the film, and he can't do it. Story is flimsy, dialogue is quite boring, the pacing is slow. One side character is unintentionally funny every time he shows up. He's like a nutty dude. And human bodies arbitrarily fall from the sky. It happens like 3 or 4 times where somebody will just be walking. I think it happens indoors once or twice. So the body just falls like from the ceiling. I don't know. I don't think it's ever really explained. Just quite odd. So almost every horror sequence is marred by bad acting. So, man. Now, the odd thing is that I've heard critics of this film complain about the Onryo ghost, but I don't think she really even makes an appearance in this one. The supernatural entity is some, weird-looking dude with, spots on his body or something who slowly crawls on the ground. So he has some similarities to, Kayako, but it's different. On the positive side, though, there are a few positives here. There is some good use of color in this film. And I always like films that use color a little bit, because you know how it is. A lot of modern horror films, they mute their color schemes, and it's all gray and grayish blue. This one has some color to it, which I thought was kind of nice. And if you choose to watch this film, be sure to listen to the theme song during the final credits. The title of the song, I am not joking, is called The Evils of Weed. Yes, you heard me correctly. The Evils of Weed. So, why would they choose a song about marijuana to end this film? I'm not sure, but that might explain the flaws of this one better than the filmmakers ever could. The Evils of Weed. I could not believe it when I was hearing this. And it's in English, the song is an English language film, so there's no mistaken translation there. Alright, let's move on. Oh, the next one's pretty bad too. Yeah, some of these are not very good. Oh boy. It is called Occult Detectives Club Doll Cemetary from Japan. So a high school occult group investigates the possible connections between the spirit realm and dolls. Now, out of curiosity, Nanami and Daisuke decide to join their high school's occult research club. Well, that should be fun. The odd group is a handful of weirdos, and the group's leader purportedly has supernatural powers. They are currently investigating a curse surrounding a student who committed suicide last year. An old doll found in the back of her closet may hold a clue. Now, Daisuke is freaked out about this, but Nanami is intrigued, until she is possessed by the same spirit of the doll that drove the student to suicide. So the group then decides to investigate a cryptic spot called the Doll Cemetery, a wretched graveyard with piles upon piles of discarded mannequins and stuffed animals. Sensing intruders, the dolls suddenly come to life, and our protagonists are forced to desperately fight off ghoulish toy clowns and zombie dolls. But what awaits them is far worse. That plot synopsis is another fantastic plot synopsis. I mean, these movies sound like they're going to be great. If not, even if they're low quality, they should be fun. This one's tough to sit through, too. Not nearly as fun as it should be. It starts off pretty well, because it showcases its moody lighting. I'm a big fan of colorful horror films, remember? And this one is colorful. So, for example, the opening shot has a lot of pink and blue to it. Very vibrant colors. And those colors, especially pink, will show up quite a bit throughout the film, so that's a positive. Unfortunately, the viewer will also be introduced to this film's glaring flaw during the first 10 minutes. totally incompetent horror money shots. You know, when you're kind of ramping up a horror scene and then you go for that money shot scare. Oh, this is one of the most incompetent films you're going to see in recent memory in terms of its money shots. The horror scenes suffer primarily from awful directing and editing in this. The direction in this film is really bad. Poorly constructed horror and really lame in general. To be frank, I think it's embarrassing here. I've seen student films that are significantly better than this. So at times, the camera kind of shakes around, and the edits are so fast at times you can't really tell what's happening. Even when you do see what happens at times, you just shake your head in disbelief. So for example, during one scene, a protagonist trips over her own feet at least half a dozen times. It's infuriating. And to make matters worse, the ending is a real cop-out. Total cop-out ending. Now the CGI, there is some use of CGI in this, which is quite terrible, as you might expect. But again, you know, I'm very forgiving over low-grade CGI, as you've seen already, and we'll see again when we cover some future Asian horror films here from subsequent years, especially the films of Koji Shiraishi, who I think uses CGI, poor CGI, quite well. So it didn't bother me as much in this film, but it's just a heads up for you in case you hate it. So actually one film came to mind when I saw this, and that was 2005's Deathmake, which is from the Kazuo Umezu manga horror theater film series. And that one has terrible CGI at times, but I still found that one to be interesting enough for a watch. And I would rather watch Deathmake 10 more times than watch Doll's Cemetery even once more. Just gives you an idea. Now the non-horror aspects of Doll's Cemetery, like the acting and the story, are not good enough to make up for the flaws in terms of scare tactics. So this is really a really cheap film, and it's destroyed by bad direction, as I've said. So the director here is Kiyoshi Yamamoto, who also directed 2 more underwhelming horror films in 2006 that we're going to cover. Thankfully, his career seems to have been slowed down, so his negative influence on this genre seems to have been short-lived. So this is only 50 or so minutes long. Can't recommend it. It's one of 6 films in the Hideshi Hino Theater of Horror. And it's the last film in this film series, and it's also probably the weakest installment. So as a final assessment, I would say that my favorite entries in the Hideshi Hino series are Dead Girl Walking and The Boy from Hell. So we now transition away from legitimately bad films to ones that are merely mediocre, I would say. And the first of those is a film called The Vanished from Japan. So a young reporter is covering the mysterious case of a child found dead with missing internal organs. Suspecting a case of organ trafficking, he visits the doctor who was responsible for the autopsy and finds that the organs were not stolen after all. They were missing from the start. So tracing the body back to a remote area of the woods, he starts to unravel the story of a group of children who went missing 35 years ago, yet still reappear every time it rains, seemingly unaged from the day of their disappearance. So there's a nice death scene near the beginning here, involving a little boy who was stalked by a psycho with a shovel in his hand. It's a decent scene to start off with. So this victim's body kind of washes downstream and is later recovered by the protagonist, who subsequently investigates. The autumn season has a nice chilly feel to it, which is always a nice plus, a little bit of atmosphere. Regrettably, though, the film stumbles around with little in terms of memorable moments. It's so derivative that the viewer may find it difficult to keep one's attention during the later half especially. It really grinds to a halt, man. Loses all momentum. This may be unintentionally beneficial, too, because things do get rather dumb and unsatisfying later on, so it might be best not to pay too much attention to it. The little kids are not as creepy or effective as the filmmakers were going for in this one. It's just, doesn't work out. So this one, I didn't like it. The Vanished. The next film here is also from Japan, and that is Ghost Photos, The Cursed Images. If it sounds generic, that's probably because it is. So after finding their grandfather's old camera, a boy and his sister investigate some strange pictures involving a strange girl in a creepy forest. To no one's surprise, they become haunted and are forced to research the mystery behind the girl's spirit in an attempt to break the curse. Yep, this one's rather cliched, dry, and uninvolving. There's no energy to this film. There's no intensity to it. With very lethargic feel and lots of dull filler here. A lot of dull filler to sit through. Horror sequences are few and far between in this, given the dull filler that's all around, none of which are really better than average. The acting and direction are decent. They're decent enough, which prevents it from being a really terrible film. So, it's not terrible or anything, but it's totally forgettable, and I would say you could skip it. And let's move on. Next film is also from Japan, and this one is called Death Water, also known as Mizuchi. This one is not really well known much, even though it has a pretty generic title that you would expect to show up on Amazon somewhere in the US. So a newspaper correspondent, Kyoko, visits a nursing home in the outskirts of Tokyo. She finds the dead body of a resident, which was an apparent suicide. He's holding a piece of paper with the mystifying word Death Water written on it. Now, nearby are blood-stained scissors, and his eyes are squashed. The plot synopsis uses squashed. I found that to be pretty funny. She has no idea that this death is just the beginning of a horrendous nightmare. But of course, we know that because it's a horror film. So I must say that both the lead actor and the actress have been good in their prior films and subsequent films that I've seen them in. They're not big-name actors, but they're good. And they're also good in this film. The acting by the leads is certainly not a problem in this one. The big problem with Death Water is that it is simply too derivative and safe. The protagonist basically kind of walks around. She asks some questions, which wouldn't be a problem if the mystery itself was engaging, but it isn't. I like how it does take its time, though. I like the pacing in this movie in terms of how things progress. It's just not that interesting to watch. There's no urgency to anything, meanders around, like some of the other films we've covered tonight. One or two films hint at a first-person perspective of the victims, but it never really takes the opportunity to provide any really weird or entertaining hallucinations or first-person scenes that could have, fit nicely within this storyline. Scare tactics are, mostly generic, and occasionally employ fake jump scares and non-threats, which I am not a fan of. But, there are a few horror scenes in this that are pretty good. There's a suicide scene that's pretty good. There's a scene where a girl loses her hair, a window jump, and some other parts near the end that I thought were pretty good. So Death Water isn't entirely worthless, but it's ultimately forgettable and will put most people to sleep, I think. So you could skip this one. Alright, our next film here is an anthology, and that is called Black Knight. It's an anthology of 3 short horror films, 30 minutes each, one from Hong Kong, one from Japan, and one from Thailand. Now, the Hong Kong entry is called Next Door. It's July of the lunar calendar, the month of the Ghost Festival. One fateful night, a Taiwanese girl returns to look for her policeman boyfriend, only to discover that he has started an affair with his neighbor, a girl from China. So this movie has Race Wong, the lead actress from Abnormal Beauty, who plays quite an angry ghost in this. She does a pretty good job. Her human death is nicely done, but everything else is pretty mediocre here. Japanese entry is called The Dark Hole, and deals with a murder that may have been committed by a woman's alter ego. So a bride-to-be has suffered from nightmares for a while now. One day she sees a boy in a yellow outfit who has been visiting her in her dreams. However, he is only visible to her, and he vanishes when she recognizes his presence, only leaving a puddle of water behind. So her fiancé suggests to go see a psychiatrist, but that doesn't help too much, as you might guess. This one is pretty bland and unexceptional, with a lack of psychological content that you might expect given the premise. Not too good. Not terrible, though. And then the Thai entry is called The Lost Memory. A mysterious man shadows a woman wherever she goes, and she believes that this guy has, been sent by her ex-boyfriend with a malicious intent of stealing her son. So consequently, she lives in a constant state of paranoia, afraid of this guy, and her memories keep kind of slipping out of her grasp. So she starts losing it a little bit. And the more she searches, the more the scary incidents of her turbulent past come back to haunt her. This movie starts off okay, but degenerates as it goes along because it follows the unambitious path of attempting to execute a twist that is cliched and not all that interesting. So it kind of builds up to a twist that you can kind of see coming and really isn't that good. So I don't think any of these short films in Black Knight are like particularly awful, but just not worth seeking out. With so many good Asian anthologies that we've covered so far, this one's a low priority. We have one final film tonight. Alright. This one is called Ghost Train from Japan. And now this is not to be confused with Death Train, which we already covered during our exploration of 2004. Now I say this because I've gotten these two movies mixed up multiple times. Ghost Train, Death Train. So on her way to school, a high school girl sees a train accident. Afterwards, her and her friends start to experience various bizarre phenomena, including red fingerprints and a female spirit who lives at the station platform. One day, her younger sister is lost, and the only possibility seems to be that she had been taken by these spirits. So let's get the positives out of the way first here. Visuals and score are pretty good in this. The presentation is good. This isn't like a made-for-TV looking film like some of the ones we previously covered tonight. This one has pretty good production values. It looks good. One of the death scenes is also pretty good. The car wreck scenes, look out for that. But most of the kills suffer from inept execution, and one is a direct rip-off of Pulse, I thought, from 2001. It is generally on the creepy side, kind of in terms of its mood, but there are just too many cheesy moments that kind of kill the tension. You know, just as it starts gathering momentum, something like kind of cheesy happens, kind of stalls it, and it starts back from scratch again to build up that momentum of creepiness. It just keeps kind of sputtering along the way. The faces of the ghosts are touched up with like bad CGI and makeup. It doesn't work. Bad decision by the filmmakers in that regard. Also, the friendship between the two girls feels a little bit contrived and rushed, not too convincing. I think they could have spent maybe an extra 10 minutes or so, you know, kind of developing that bonding of the two lead actresses and characters to make it a little bit more convincing. Now, the lead actress in this is Erika Sawajiri, who is very talented, has given some very good performances in her career, and is also one of the most beautiful women in the world, in my opinion. But too many flaws here in this mediocre film. She can't carry it. So I do not recommend Ghost Train. But it's probably the least bad, or it's probably the best film we've covered tonight. So if the premise sounds interesting to you, why not? So that's our first crack into Asian horror films from 2006. My next video is going to finish off the less impressive films and maybe crack a little bit. We'll get a few of the decent ones in near the end of that video. Then we'll move on to the better stuff. And as always, we'll see you next time.